Hello and welcome back to Elden Ring. With the incoming announcement of the DLC and its launch date, 100% no doubt happening at the Game Awards on December 7th, unless it doesn't, which is entirely possible, I'm back for a fun little video to look back at the history of Elden Ring. The many builds that were absolutely busted, whether they're still great now or a shadow of what they once were. A lot of them are nowhere near as strong as they used to be, but it's just fun to look back at some of the craziness we saw. The majority of these builds were just logical things that happened at the time, which the devs maybe didn't expect to be so good, rather than some of the mad exploits that we found in the game's history. So let's begin with a classic as a good example of what I mean. Moonveil, which to this day still has a lot of potential as a weapon, but it was insane at launch. The unique ash, the transient moonlight, was basically why the weapon was and is so great. With this, you've got a sheath the sword attack where you unleash a magical arc of damage, extending the range of your attacks. You've got two options in the light attack, which sends out this horizontal arc, or the heavy, which is vertical and much more effective. It's still good now, but god was it strong at launch. It was by far and away the most popular weapon due to the obvious and instant raw power of it. You could deal huge bursts of magic damage while also building up stagger, since you're also sending out heavies. Press yourself against the target and you hit with both the sword and the magic for even more burst. Whether you're facing a boss or killing someone with basically one or two of these heavies in PvP, that original Moonveil was a bit too much. The fact that such a potent ash attack also featured reliable reach, while also coming out really quick, meant you could cheese bosses by only using that heavy with the ash as a punish, or just trade in PvP or punish any mistake for a massive chunk of their health. It also had insane posture damage. In PvP, it meant a stagger every time. In PvE, you'd lead to the critical hit punishes very quickly, which was very relevant at the time of launch, with how easy it was to get since you didn't have to head far into the east to go to Caelid to get it. It's actually been nerfed since launch many times, buffed here and there, and so it remains a fantastic weapon. Our next pick is one I used myself at the time quite a lot. It's the Sword of Night and Flame, a really cool weapon in its design, and just like Moonveil, it features an ash that lets you choose between a light or heavy attack version. This weapon was the top pick by speedrunners at a time, especially when combined with the now removed trick using the Ash of War Royal Knight's Resolve. You could use the Royal Knight's Resolve to enhance the next attack you use, but at the time, that meant other weapons or even spells too. Technically, as long as the weapon was active in one of your hands, you could two-hand another weapon and still get the benefits of the buff. The weapon itself was an interesting mix of intelligence and faith though. Both ash options were strong. One lets you send out a wall of fire for great AoE or wider reaching attacks, and the other was essentially a single thrust magic laser beam, streaming out into the targets at good range, used more commonly than the fire option. The laser ash is very similar to the Comet Azur spell we're actually going to talk about next. But in any case, speedrunners would grab this sword and use it to laser beam their way through boss health bars super quick. Combine that with a Royal Knight's Resolve trick and you'd see such insane bursts that you basically just walk through combat easily, which was probably why it eventually got nerfed, where they removed the Royal Knight's Resolve trick from the game entirely. It basically halved the damage of the laser beam, and it led to speedrunners changing their weapon focuses at the time. Personally though, I really enjoyed speedrunning Elden Ring, so I have very fond memories of that weapon. Moving on though, the next broken build played similar, but from a spellcaster's point of view. It's of course the infinite mana Comet Azur boss melt build, extremely popular in its time for the ability to completely kill bosses from insane range in one or maybe a couple casts. You'd channel out that beam from downtown, burning through them. It was a bit of a gimmick build, prone to the problems of a boss dodging or, moving out of the beam, but it's undeniable that with the right setup and punish window, you'd absolutely death beam bosses down, and that would commonly go. Combine that with the unlimited FP physic tier, the Cerulean Hidden tier, and you could cast anything for no FP cost for 15 seconds. And so, the Azur spell, which was normally very expensive on FP, especially when you continue to channel it, well, you could just do that for up to 15 seconds during the buff. Combine it with spell enhancing options, and of course Terra Magica sigil to stand on, and you push the damage of the comet to silly levels. I watched an ungodly amount of streamers do their first playthrough of Elden Ring using this gimmick build, and it was funny to watch, so credit to them. And while yet you could cheese kill most anything, it still required a bit of setup and timing, especially on harder, more mobile enemies. But the raw damage potential and the insane range you could do it made it a uniquely strong build, even if it did require quite a lot of investment in terms of, say, the weapons you're using, the armor, the talismans, and more. But I'd easily dub that an Elden Ring classic of a build. Alright, I think it's time we talk about bleed builds now. While patches came and went, I think it's fair to say one of the craziest times was that patch where the arcane weapons were fixed. The game launched in a way where arcane weapons weren't scaling properly, so rather than be a buff of some kind, they just made them work as intended, and they were a little bit too strong. The leader of the pack was easily Rivers of Blood, that blood red katana. Thanks to the arcane pushing bleed build-up potential beyond reason, and the damage of this weapon's Ash of War, Corpse Piler, you'd be bursting down people in just like one use of it, especially in PvP, where you'd be staggering them at the same time, which was comical. Even if they like dodged the first swing, maybe the follow-up ones, at some point they'd just be clipped by one of the many swings and then get staggered, forcing them to take the full brunt of the remaining combo, and the range at which you could use it was so good too. It became one of the most invasive, irritating, hilarious weapons you'd see constantly due to just how strong it was, and so how popular it became, whether it was just a 1v1 in a duel or a gank squad or whatever. But it was also insane in PvE. It became speedrunners' contending option for a while, even against bosses that literally didn't bleed. If it did bleed though, Corpse Piler was extremely effective, and that's all you needed to use. The weapon remained oppressive for a good while, until eventually the poise was massively reduced on the attack. No longer could you one-hit stagger or pop someone in 1 or 2 combos easily. Still, it's visually and mechanically a very cool weapon. But I did say bleed builds, didn't I? So let's talk about Sepu, one of the most busted thing in the game's history. Painfully annoying to deal with in PvP, the moment you start seeing someone buff with that, you'd have to rush to them or accept the fact that within 1 or 2 hits you'd pop with a bleed. And of course it reigns supreme in PvE, where any enemy that could bleed would bleed many times the moment you go near them with duo weapon setups using Seppuku. It could be a power stance combo of any fast or long reaching weapon with both weapons buffed, like the Naginata spear types, or potentially the best for speed and output being the Scavenger's curved sword combo. Curved swords have an awesome running attack in power stance, and the speed of their standing light combos, well, that works up bleed really quick too. The downside of Seppuku was the application of it. You need to like two-hand your offhand, then apply the buff, then go into power stance and apply the buff, and that go to your main hand, and then you're ready to go. But now you've just damaged yourself, so maybe you need to heal. But really, the buffs lasted more than enough time to kill any target, raise your AR when you did it outside of the bleed, and the damage you dealt to yourself was just nothing relevant. And that's actually one of the ways they ended up nerfing it. They greatly increased how much damage you deal to yourself when applying it. So if you were to put both on in a duel, you'd find yourself with much less health. So either way, for a long while, any build using Seppuku was a top tier one. Now, jumping back to insanely effective speedrunning tools, let's talk about the Hor Frost Stomp, Ash of War, and the build surrounding that. It's a quick stomp to send out a long, wide-reaching ice field. Pops up with a wave of ice from below. Great damage, cost very little FP, and not only reached far, but through things, meaning it was a really good pick for defeating the Godskin duo boss that caused many so much trouble. You could stand behind a pillar and then stomp with the Hor Frost through the pillar, meaning the Godskin on the other side would take the damage while it's busy going around the pillar. With its wide reaching of attack, it was just reliable. You could spam it so quickly. You could stomp and stomp in combo, pushing DPS entirely through the Ash of War. It caused stagger, letting you control a fight. Commonly, speedrunners would find this Ash on a specific axe, the Ice Rind Hatchet in the leg section. So it meant very early they could get their hands on that Ash and use it to dumpster the required bosses. Technically, you could also get the Ash as a universal pick, but either way, eventually the power of this Ash came crumbling down. It was nerfed to greatly slow down how fast the Ash actually comes out, and the area of attack was decreased too. On top of that, they also made the FP cost higher, so where you used to be able to spam them out really quick, no problem, now you're struggling to get off multiple, and it's a lot more costly. Still, for a period, it was awesome. Next up, a change of pace with 2 builds all about one-shotting. Firstly, of course, is the Giant's Crusher based one-shot builds. So in short, the Giant Crusher has a unique heavy attack which is causing you to flip over and slam, dealing big charged up damage. We can enhance that damage in so many ways, like standard power buffs, via incantations, and of course Ashes of War. Royal Knight's Resolve would come into it, but also things like the Jelly Shield, which enhances your AR while that Ash is active. You could lower your own health, attack from surprise, physic buff, and so on and so on. It all led to the insane damage potential for the one hit could deal enough damage to kill even the Gargoyle boss in Caelid in that one hit, but it comes at the cost of all that setup. A lighter, much more viable version would allow you to crush bosses in a few hits and a few charge heavies and be more reliable overall. Compared to that though, our successive hit-based Corkscrew of Death was much easier and more reliable. We're talking about the weapon and the build tied to Marius, Executioner Sword, the weapon used by the very cool Bell-Bearing Hunter. Eventually this weapon in its Ash of War, Eocade's Dancing Blade, was buffed to a critical point that you could output this insane burst in a consistent way, since if you missed, you could then finally roll out of the attack instead of being stuck in the animation. Successive hits just means dealing ticks of damage fast in succession. Further, of course, you could buff up your damage with Flame Grant Me Strength or your Physic, potent aromatics like the Blood Boil one, and even Terra Magica can boost its damage too. All of that is of course still some setup to achieve, but much less than the one shot with Giant's Crusher, making it contextually more viable. It's potent enough to kill bosses in one Ash as long as they don't evade or move out of it. And really it just means time the attack for a suitable opener or punish whenever you have a window to get the corkscrew off. And because it's medium to close range, you can use it in a variety of situations. So the DPS potential was insane, and it still is very good to this day. Moving on from those one-shot concepts though, it's time to talk about that one weapon, the Blasphemous Blade. I think we all know about this silly weapon. It's a faith-based greatsword, which as a weapon type was buffed and buffed over time. It's a weapon with physical and fire damage, which is great. A weapon that grants lifesteal on damage and lifesteal on kill. In fact, it even heals you on a kill, even if the weapon wasn't used to kill. Maybe it's just in your offhand or something. And then there's its Ash of War, which deals fantastic fire damage from long range, while being wide in its spread with potential stagger behind it. A menace in open world PvP or free-for-all arena with off-screen Ash spam. So many builds use this weapon in combo with another or as the weapon as its core, and you can even set up a build to have, say, ultra high lifesteal where you just spam the Ash over and over, tanking hits and healing up. It's just been a fantastic faith weapon since the beginning, and only continually improved in a variety of ways. I put this one near the end of the video just because I think we all know this weapon has a lot going for it and it forms the basis of many great builds. But I also think it's not as blatantly strong as the peak of Rivers of Blood or Moonveil, but I think its raw ability to do so much and be a consistent top tier pick, it deserves a mention. But that brings us to the last build concept that marked the best of what it does at one time or another, and that is simply the Mimic Tier Summon. The universally agreed best summon deserves a mention in the video. It's a summon that instead of costing FP, you can give up some of your health, which just one flask will solve anyway, and it means builds not raising their FP can actually use it. Which is funny because they balanced a lot of the better summons around making them cost more FP, and this doesn't cost any. This means you create a busted build and suddenly there's two of you. It copies your weapons and gear, including the spells and ashes and more. The summon concept alone carried many players through many difficult boss fights they'd struggled for longer with otherwise. And just think about it. Say a bleed build using Sepu is strong enough on its own, but with two of them attacking at once, not only is it taking the aggro off you, which is great, but it doubles your status build up potential. Just having two of you in any build is good, but when you've got a good build that maximizes the concept, it of course goes nuts. You could even do little tricks to give your Mimic ways to stay alive, or say have it intentionally take aggro with say the talisman Shabriri's Woe, summoning the Mimic while you've got that on, then taking it off so the Mimic has the effect while you don't. It was just so painfully the best summon by far, even when you had other good picks to consider. You could always make your own version of it with the Mimic. Eventually nerfs came though, like changing the nature of the AI so it became less reliable than before. And while that and damage nerfs certainly made the summon weaker, I think it's still one of the best options in the game. But there you have it. That's my little look back at some of the strongest builds and stuff in Elden Ring at their various times. Many of these have been changed greatly by patches, so some aren't remotely as good as they used to be, but some are still fantastic options. Something I love in hindsight now with Elden Ring and its life cycle is how much things have changed. Speedrunners have used so many different strats and weapons and stuff. PvP was dominated by certain weapons at different times, and it's created a lot of different life and variety in the kind of life of the game. So I actually hope we see some busted strong weapons in the DLC and some that aren't even good. So we see nerfs and buffs that change things as we go. I think it creates a unique time in the current meta. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the talk. For now, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thanks for watching, see you next time.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.